Welcome back to the Venture Podcast. Today, James and I had the amazing opportunity to talk with Vino. Vino is a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree. He was a Facebook employee in the early 2010s, and he has built 3 incredible businesses. In this episode, we discuss Vino's life journey and his inherent bias towards taking action. We discuss some of the lessons he learned while at Facebook in the direct-to-consumer space, and how he applied these lessons to build, scale, and exit 3 successful companies. We hope you enjoy this episode.
I guess where we'll start here today, Vino, is we like to get a fuller picture of the entrepreneur. So why don't we start by going back to your childhood and your high school days. What were you interested in? Tell me about that time in your life.
Cool. High school days, interested in becoming a citizen in this country.
Yeah.
Probably priority number 1. And then 2, going down like a path that would provide like some type of security and financial stability. Like I think as a Sri Lankan immigrant, generally any immigrant on the Eastern Hemisphere probably relates to this, but like most likely the career was going to be doctor. That's what parents would be like, saying it since I was like in grade 3 or so. But I was like very, focused on like those 2 things. Like a lot of my activities in school, like before even volunteering was a requirement, I would do volunteering. And a lot of it was just around like the citizenship journey. I actually came to like Canada as a refugee, and like there's this war in my mother country and all this kind of stuff that really impeded on my ability to like really think beyond that. Like I was just like, when I was born in Switzerland, even though I'm Sri Lankan, and in Switzerland, if you're not like the way it works is like you don't get citizenship by naturalization. Like you can't just be born there and get citizen. You have to be of like Swiss heritage, which means like ethnicity wise. And because of that, and the fact that they have conscription and you have to like enroll into the army, my parents came to Canada. And when they did, the caveat was like, technically I'm still a refugee. It's not like we can go back to our mother country where we're a minority and there's a lot of issues against us at the time. But the second issue is like, couldn't even go to the country I'm born in. So technically in high school, I was a citizen of 0 countries. They'd have to deport me to the ocean, which actually we got 2 deportation notices, I believe, throughout our experience in high school, which definitely shifts my high school experience. And that's why like community impact was a big thing. My premise ever since I was in elementary school was like, if I make a big enough impact to my community and Canada, like they can't let me go. And honestly, that dragged on until my startup career. But really my high school focus was like that piece and, why not be a doctor? Because that'll make my parents happy.
So tell us, out of high school, you had an interest in being a doctor, maybe that was mainly coming from your parents, I guess.
Yeah.
When did you figure out that, maybe you wanted to try something on your own or that you were entrepreneurial?
Yeah. It was actually while I was in high school doing this volunteering stuff. Everyone's joined a school club, and to be honest, like there's very little impact from that. Like they did the same thing as the year before, didn't really like student council or a lot of the clubs, the budgets weren't big enough. And there's this opportunity in the town of Markham that I was at that, had this like youth council group thing, and they got like $30K a budget a year, and they can organize these like nonprofit events. And I really enjoyed and grew in that environment the most because here I was joining at like grade 8 all the way throughout high school was there, and, could solve problems in a very small scale. Like, yes, one of the problems was like my friends have a band and they want to perform. So I did a battle of the bands. Not the biggest problem to solve, but it's exactly right. Like it's something, and it gave you autonomy, it gave you the ability to like work with a team, budget, and like have an output. And at the end of the day, like those events were quite meaningful to myself and the people participating in it. So that was really my first exposure into entrepreneurship. And then there's this nonprofit at the time called Impact Entrepreneurship Group, which was really early in terms of like bringing tech entrepreneurship into Canada. And it was before Next 36 even existed in Canada. And, here were the founders of like RIM, Kick, a whole other bunch of platforms that were coming out of Waterloo. And they're like, hey, we want to create an ecosystem here. Joined that, volunteered early on. And we would have these conferences where they'd bring these founders in. And now that I think about it, it was like very early days, great opportunity to see a lot of these entrepreneurs and meet them face to face. And I think I caught the bug at that moment where I just kind of started seeing the dots connect, where I was like, okay, I like to do a lot of this nonprofit stuff, started a nonprofit company myself. But the truth was, is like, I really like to solve problems. And I think at that younger age, I just saw that connect a lot more. And, as I tried to fight that as much as possible going to university, I was like, let me go to Western, let me study biomedical science, try to do the doctor thing. Because I have this like little interest in this stuff, I'll take Ivy and business as a secondary piece. And that was my attempt in trying to hold on to like the original plan from like both compounder from my parents and myself. But the truth was, is like, I think over time, like that slowly started to chip away as I couldn't push away this like desire and drive that I had to like build something.
In what hobby you ended up helping?
Yeah.
What then mentioned mom and dad involved?
One, if my personal this don't listen to this part, but they know this at this point. But like, I don't think like I think a lot of entrepreneurship is glamorized on this like whole like I dropped everything and just took the risk right away. I'm actually quite a calculated a risk taker. And when I look at my past, like a lot of it was like I would still be in school, and then for my reading week spring break trip, I decided to go to San Francisco because I'm like, okay, I'm around all this tech stuff. Like, let me just go there and like get this out of my system. It's kind of like an eat, pray, love trip. Like, let me just go travel back in Asia. Then I'll be good to stay at home. Similarly, I did that in San Francisco. And what I realized was like, I go there, and this is like 2009, 2010 time, early bustling days. Like, Facebook's just starting to hit this like kind of peak as it's growing. And every startup under the sun is like coming up, and there's all this funding, there's all this news and attention in the mainstream media. And just like walking into a coffee shop, I met like Tristan Walker, who's like one of the head of growth at Foursquare. He started like Bevel, which is like one of these like top D2C brands as well. And just at a coffee shop, and you could approach people and you meet them. I cold emailed Alexis Ohanian when he was working on Hipmunk at the time, and he met up, and like you could just do anything. And I was like some 19-year-old kid with like the most amount of audacious energy as possible, and ended up meeting this guy Brian Wong, who's starting this mobile advertising platform called Keep. And he said he was hiring a business development intern, and I didn't tell him I was in school or finished school. I was just like, hey, listen, like, let me apply for this. Then on the third day of my reading week, spring break vacation, I ended up getting this job. And he's like, can you start? I'm like, yes. It's only until the end of the week where I had to go back to Canada that I tell him, hey, FYI, I'm a student, and I can't actually work as like a salaried employee. And that's really like what made my jump away from school. It's like I'd always find these like little opportunities to get out of that situation, to like expose myself. And when I went back to Western, I was like, hosting keggers at the same time, cold emailing 200 mobile app developers to try and get them to use our ad network. So it was like this like chasm that I would always like try and jump between like kind of keeping things where I could kind of please the people I want to please and kind of keep this path that I thought that was like meant for me, at the same time while taking a little bit of risk. And I think that those opportunities like that spring break trip gave me the confidence where in the following summer, I ended up taking an unpaid internship at a startup in the direct-to-consumer space before it was a thing. And I learned so much and got so much autonomy and like felt so much more confidence. And I think that was what the driver was, to the point where when the Facebook opportunity came up for me to fully drop out of school and do it, I jumped at it.
That's awesome. And something, I guess, like today we're doing the interview in the next Canada office, and you're part of Next 36, right?
Yes, or I think maybe the next. I don't really know.
That's okay, but Vino is a part of Next. That's all that really matters. And I'm sure you've been to many of Rez's classes. Rez is one of the founders of the program, and he often talks about the importance of making a decision and taking actions. So, like for you, that going to San Francisco that time, that's a decision you made, and I'm sure you've made many decisions over the course of your time. And I just wanted to ask, what are some of the best, decisions that you've made, or some of the worst decisions? And what have you just learned from the act of continually making decisions and not being stagnant at any given time?
Yeah, I think decision making is like crucial for anything. Like, I think one of the things that is the most important is to kind of like wake up and every day ask yourself, like, am I ready to fail, and do I deserve success? It's kind of these two things I've been learning from like one of my coaches that I work with. And it's like, one of those things around decision making is that key aspect. It's like when you're cognizant and aware of the fact that you're always willing to fail, and then you deserve success, then you'll get better at the fact that like every decision you make is a full crapshoot in terms of like where it lands, right? And I think people think that, okay, the more I practice it, the better I get at decision making. The truth is not that. It's like you just got a 50-50 odd of it being right or wrong 100% of the time. And I think for myself is like, there's a lot of those moments at my younger ages that I looked at it like I wouldn't be where I am today with, exiting 3 companies technically to this point, if it wasn't for this one decision I made, like in high school or in elementary school, as I mentioned before. But even I tend to attribute a lot of it towards my decision to like drop out and work at Facebook. Like this was 2011 or so. Facebook, I don't think had gone public yet. It got public in 2012 or so, or maybe the end of 2011. That's what it was. And they had an opportunity for like a contract role to like literally just pull reports. Like you're like a monkey report puller, and like you're just going in, clicking download, like fucking adjusting the Excel here and there once in a while, and sending it out to advertisers. And this is before newsfeed ads exist. Like this is super early days Facebook. But I think my belief at that point was that I knew that once I got in and they saw me work, then like they could see the potential I have to continue working here. Right. And at the time, I didn't think I was going to drop out. Like, that's what I always tell my parents, and I still stick to that to this day. Like, I was like, let me just take a break. Let me just do this thing for a little bit and see where it goes. And I think like that was like one of the key decisions I always take with everything. Like, don't overthink every decision as like a lifelong commitment. It was like, here's an opportunity in front of me. Does it mean a lot? Yes, because in those early days, like Facebook was quite a thing. And I knew that like being around those people would give me an edge, even though maybe I thought I was still going to be a doctor or whatever it was going to be. Like, yes, a doctor who worked at Facebook in 2011 is probably better than a doctor who didn't. Like, maybe that would help me. Maybe I'd like learn how to do a better interview. Who knows? Like, but I'd create that justification, making that decision that I'm going to commit and like apply for this thing. And once I did, it was just like a life-changing opportunity. If it wasn't for me being there early, it's not because I'm like some genius who worked at Facebook, who worked on the best products. I was there at the right place and the right time, and got to work with a lot of the fastest growing brands, saw how the ad platform's built. I can spend so much time with the auction engineers that I could write down exactly how a piece of content ranks on the auction at that time, no longer anymore, but it was valuable. Like, I think it was a great learning environment that I was looking for originally in university, but didn't find. And like, that was a key decision-making moment for me where I was like, let me just take this jump. I'll just take a semester off. Then it became half a year, and then eventually I didn't go back.
Yeah. And awesome. I remember before we pressed record, you were actually telling me a little bit about how you got that job at Facebook. What do you think made these people who hired you trust you, even though you were still a student and didn't really have any credentials at the time?
This is definitely one of my favorite experiences, and I love to share this. It probably doesn't work as well now for everyone, but I think the thing that I always had was like, I'd sit in these moments after interviews or after a certain point, and you ask yourself, what else can I do? Like, you can only really control what you can impact, right? And after you do an interview, you think, okay, I'm done my job here. And luckily, like prior to joining Facebook, I did an internship at TD for recruitment. And I learned a lot of the biases, not just with that bank, but like recruitment process in general at that time. Like, there is a lot of biases. Like if you have too many degrees, if you have too little degrees, too much experience, too little experience, it's like this chasm that goes back and forth. But no matter how many inputs you put into the recruitment process, you only really know 20% of that individual. And you're only going to figure out that other 80% once they actually do the job. Like, that's the truth. And like when I did my own company, like most of the times, like we'd give people projects because it's a great way to see if someone can like live up to what they're talking about. Because everyone can sell their own story and everyone can sell their own brand. With Facebook, when I was at that time, like it wasn't this conscious. I was just like sitting in my friend's condo. I was like renting his sunroom. Okay, like there's like this boiling hot room in the corner of his condo. I'm like renting it, and luckily that condo had a hot tub there. And I took a day off, and I applied for this like Facebook contractor job. Went through the interviews, and I could tell from being a recruiter, I could tell people are asking me way too many easy questions. Rule number one: if they're asking you to do way too many easy questions, they're probably like writing you off right away. And I could tell with every other person when I interviewed, like, here's like, I'm 20 years old at the time. Here's someone else who's 30. Here's someone else who's 40, etc. Working in the advertising industry, which is the type of people they wanted to start bringing in because they wanted to start fighting against TV ad dollars and people with that kind of experience. And I could tell like from the questions, it was just a little too easy for me. And no one was digging into the real questions of like, hey, you're too young. Like, we don't feel like you have the experience. Two, you're like a startup guy. Like you've done this like thing where you went to spring break and kind of got a job and all this kind of stuff. Like space was not a startup anymore. We're going into the corporate world. We're going to go public soon. It's going to be a different change. And then the third being like the experience in the advertising industry. I really didn't have as much experience in comparison to everyone else in specifically advertising. So I'm sitting in this like my friend's hot tub in his condo, just like reminiscing. I took the day off from work at the time. I was actually working at that recruitment firm, and I was just like sitting in the hot tub at the time, and be like, what the fuck can I really do here? And that's when the moment came to me, like, I'm gonna write them a letter. I'm gonna say like, here are the 3 things that you didn't identify. Why not to hire me? And I'm gonna like write 3 things where, like almost like combating those items. And like before, like BuzzFeed listicles exist, I'm like, this is the way I think. Like I always think in listicle formats. And I wrote that, and then at the end, I wrote like, like how do I show them my audacious energy? Like with my spring break trip with Keep, like it was because I put myself out there that things ended up connecting. And I think maybe I had so much of a correlation that anytime I put myself out there, I'll get someone to win, which is not the truth. I think it's still worth it. But at that time, I was like, what can I do to put myself out there? And essentially, I wrote this like line that said, I'll give you 100% money back guarantee if I don't perform at any point of this job, like this full year contract, even if it's on month 8, month 12, I'll give you all the money back. Little did I know, like legally, companies can't do that. But that like spoke volumes to them. And I remember my manager, she told me like a few months after I had the job, how like that letter was literally the main reason that kind of like tipped them over to say like, okay, we're going to take a risk on this guy versus someone else that they were potentially going to give the opportunity. But yeah, it's my foot in the door, like taking that risk and jumping there and like getting that, like that story defines, this energy that I had since day one that I'm still fighting to have right now, all the way up until, hopefully years down the road. So I love that innate instinct that I had, but like now it's a lot more like consciously taking that mentality of like making the risk, making that decision and just jumping for it. And knowing that the value you get back is, well, you don't know if it's going to be worth it, but it's worth the shot.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I guess now to pivot maybe a little more to Kabo, and many of the other companies, founded multiple and exited multiple companies, which is pretty insane. I don't think we've had someone on the podcast who's done that much already. But just going back, I guess, to your experiences and those lessons that you learned at Facebook, whether they be technical lessons, from your getting your hands in the nitty gritty, or whether it's management or risk taking lessons. Could you talk about how you transferred lessons at Facebook and from your younger days into founding your companies?
Yeah, honestly, I felt like I checked out of Western and went into like Facebook as like a university, and it was phenomenal. Like seeing how everything from like product management, I learned like the ins and outs of that process, even seeing the side of sales and advertising and like revenue, like how this like combination that Facebook did really well in the early days was like, here's this platform where we could reach like hundreds of millions of people at the time, or 500 million, a billion people at the time. And we figured out a way where we can balance user sentiment, which is like getting people to use your app for its core reason every single day with generating revenue. The truth may not be the same today with the platform, but like I think the ecosystem of apps they own hold true to it. And I think like, honestly, it's like a once in a lifetime experience. Like you never get the opportunity to be that early in the company and see things. And like, to be honest, like Facebook also didn't have a lot of audit control. So I could just like hit up an engineer who's working on a product and be like, hey, like, let me just talk to this guy. He'll just tell me what the hell he's working on. But nowadays, like, there's like a lot of like privacy and compliance. Like Apple was really good at always having that in place. But I think I just like learned a lot from like what an engineer actually does to all the way of like how these teams are structured as to like what takes, what does it take to like think a little bit differently to bring something to market. At the same time, like learning like what doesn't work. Honestly, like that's probably the biggest takeaway I had at Facebook was like, after these ad products are built, it's great for me to see these things and contribute to lead ads or business management to these tools that we help build. But the bigger thing was like what didn't work, like watching like Casper and all these companies like spend ridiculous amounts of money acquiring a customer and not doing it profitably. Like, I think like that's actually what gave me the confidence to do my own direct to consumer company. It was like, seeing the rise and the fall of D2C while in one place. Like, you're the back-end publisher. You saw everyone's cost per acquisition. You also saw like the way venture capital work. Like, everyone was funding these things thinking that, okay, like if someone buys a mattress today, we've got them for 10 years. Like, the truth is not that, clearly. It's like, yeah, just because I buy a mattress, like, I don't know what my mattress brand is. Like, I don't have loyalty to them. 10 years from now, when I need a new mattress, I'm just going to like look online and whoever gets my attention gets it. Like, brand loyalty, learning that piece, like learning a lot about retention, learning a lot about like identifying the customer. And I think, outside of being an egotistical 20-year-old who had like, super cocky, was just like, yeah, I don't need Facebook anymore. Been here for 5 years. That's like the equivalent of like a boomer being at a job for like 10, 20 years. Like, I'm like, 5 years, I'm out of here. Like, let me go do my own thing. And while I was at Facebook, I actually built my own like private label company where we did security cameras. We did like, you name it, we did it, like furniture items to tech products. Because I was working in China for a small stint, like I did a little small stint of a trip in China in the early days to teach factories on how to like cut out like American middlemen dropshippers and just do it themselves. And now obviously we see Temu, but the difference is like at that time I was like, why are these Americans like doing the branding stuff when you can just teach the factory owners to do it themselves? And went out there and did it. I got hooked onto the whole consumer product world, and that's kind of what gave me the confidence as well to do Kabo, because what I saw was like a huge learning that I took away from Facebook was, one, if you can identify an audience online and offline, that is number one thing that you need to do for any kind of advertising or marketing piece. Because if you look at Kabo, where our mission is to like help dogs eat healthier food every single day and make it enjoyable, the best thing about dog people is like, them offline, because if someone's walking a dog, you know that they have a dog. If they're at a dog park, they have a dog. Great identifier. But in this new age, it's all about how do you identify them digitally. And one thing I saw with brands like Casper was like, I can't go look at your Instagram accounts and be like, these guys need a new mattress, right? But you can look at, anyone's social media accounts with pets, babies, two audiences that are like very identifiable from my history of Facebook. Was like, people post that stuff nilly-willy. Like, no one's asking to say like, hey, put up a photo of your cat. Like, hey, let me see your dog today. Like, no, people are just weirdly like naturally put it. And like, that's great. When we have an instinctive behavior to do it, it's phenomenal, because what that means for me as an advertiser is I can identify that audience and reach them effectively. And Google, that's what Google does really well. We have search intent, right? If I'm looking for a mattress, I'm typing mattress. But what unlocks the billion-dollar businesses to the next stage in this age of digital consumer businesses is that discovery platform. Can I identify them on Pinterest, Facebook ecosystem, TikTok? And what helps me identify them to some level of accuracy? And that was like one of the biggest lessons that I took away from Facebook. And the second piece was like really around retention. Like, you need a product and a business that's a part of everyone's day in life, and they recognize it. And the thing that you do with dogs is like three things. You feed them every day, you walk them every day, and you pick up their poo. We had to choose one of those three, and like we really looked at food as like that one area where we could like build trust. And we're part of their everyday routine. If we do a good enough job, then great. We've got a good average order value from a customer getting on a monthly basis. We have the opportunity to build something even bigger from there.
That's awesome.
And did you have that idea while at Facebook and then you left?
Yeah, I wish. Not at all. Like, I think post Facebook, I was doing this whole like dropshipping private label company. Luckily, we were able to sell to our fulfillment center, who was in China at the time. They were like really interested in dropshipping. We saw it as a great opportunity. It was like an opportunity for us as well to like kind of pay back. We wanted to help our parents kind of like close out their mortgages and things like that. So we saw it as a good exit opportunity to get a small chunk of cash to do that. And then afterwards, I was like, let me go work at a couple of like VC-backed D2C companies, because this is like prime D2C 2018 time. And I joined my friend's company, who was an ex-colleague of mine at Facebook, who was doing a hangover drink in LA. And two reasons I went was like, one, I know D2C growth, and two, like I got a visa to go to LA. So I was like, and Facebook did try to bring me earlier on, but because I didn't have a degree or anything, like it was impossible. So then,
by the way, did you believe in the product? Like, did it work?
Oh yeah, so that's what convinced me. So shout out to my boy Cecil on this one, but like he came out to Toronto, and like we tried out like the hangover drink, and I was like, this is phenomenal, because I went to Western. There's only two things I learned there, which is like drinking and another substance. But the thing is, like, I took this thing and it was like phenomenal. Like, there's a lot of science that backs like the concept of what contributes to hangover, and one of those things is like the anxiety you get from it, and the other thing is like this like delay in I guess like thinking, like you just feel a little bit slower and you have fogginess. And this product did really well in those two categories at that time, and I absolutely loved it. Like tried the product, I was like, I want to back this thing 100%. And my buddy, he was just at Tesla at the time, so it was like I could see the ads in my mind being like, ex Tesla employee starts hangover drink. And honestly, you Google it, that's all the article. I note that like crazy being a girl guy, but like I hopped over, joined that company, and I was like, as I was mentioned before, like I'm a risk adverse entrepreneur. Like I didn't jump into that confidence, even though I did like my own private label thing. Like my point of view on that was like I'm a dropshipper category. Like that's kind of how I bucket myself. I don't know how to build a real brand that gets on these TechCrunch articles like Dollar Shave Club or Glossier. I know I always saw myself as lesser than. If I go work at my buddy's company, I help grow them. We got them up to 10 million. Now they've sold over like 200 million bottles, across North America alone. Like, then a phenomenal job. That brand is like ubiquitous, and it's even here in like finding Circle K's and things like that. But I stayed there for a year. I was like, I'm gonna be here for a year, learn how the VC market works, like get exposed to all these things, and had great opportunities to meet the craziest investors, and like LA celebrities were just investing at the time, so it was wild. But it was while I was there that I really built the confidence to be like, I'm going to build Kabo. And like, even when we had this idea of Kabo, like, I hit up my brother, who's my identical twin brother. Luckily, we also both worked at Facebook. He actually finished his degree, and then through the power of nepotism, I brought him in. I learned about this concept of nepotism. Like, okay, I'm going to use that. And there's no better use than an identical twin. And, like we both compounded a very similar skill set, but he's a lot more finance driven and analytical. And, at the time he was consulting for a bunch of like companies as well. And, we came together and said, like, let's bring in a few other friends within our network that we knew that could be great co-founding base. And, originally kind of hashed out these ideas from like vitamins for dogs all the way down to eventually getting to Kabo, which was on the food side. But it really came from like building the confidence of seeing a bit of the other side, right? Like I never really got to see like how venture capital worked. I think I was always on like the side of the publisher of Facebook of like seeing how people spent the venture capital dollars, did my own thing, but it was like bootstrapped on my credit card, and luckily it worked out. But like didn't understand like what it took to like raise money, and like just joining that company, doing it was like what gave me the confidence to be like, okay, like I have an idea with this Cabo thing. And like Season even knew like I was only going to be there for about a year working in LA for more labs. I was like, hey, listen, I'll come in as head of growth. Like, let me help you get to this milestone. And I really want to do my own thing after. And I think like that's, two things I took away from that was like one of those being like understanding like when you're bringing team members on, like everybody has a journey. Like I knew like from the moment I built Cabo, like not everyone's going to be working here for 20 years, like helping dogs eat better. Like I'm not that much of an Indian. Like if you're an engineer, scientist, whatever it is, like we always have this concept of like, as an employer, your job is to kind of give this learning as a bonus to your salary. And we accepted that. And I think like that's what I took away was like when I was at More Labs, helping in morning recovery, I got to see that side of like venture capital side. And I realized, okay, I can kind of do this. And I understood like what not to do and like how to set expectations properly. And that gave me the confidence to take something like Cabo with just an idea, start building it on a bootstrap basis, but have the mentality that like potentially we're going to raise funds for it.
Awesome. So outside of your twin and your third co-founder, I want to talk about that first hire because that's a principle or something that's often brought up in the startup space. How did you pick your first hire? Can you walk us through that process and what that looked like?
Yeah, honestly, like our first hire was probably our video editor. And it was just based on a functionality need. Like I think it was just like super simple. Like sometimes I advise a lot of startups now, and I find like a lot of the first hires or those initial hires tend to be things that you're predicting you need. Like, hey, I need this growth thing, or I need this thing, I need this thing. For us, it was like super simple. Like there's so much stress and anxiety running through me that like the number one thing I'm thinking about as the person who runs paid acquisition, organic growth, and things like that, like we knew that we needed more video content generation. Like we needed to edit videos faster. And like, that was literally our first hire in that piece, as a contractor to be like, can we, validate this idea? Like we have this beef recipe we created from some like veterinary scientists that we contracted in the States. Okay, if we could sell this beef recipe to 30 people in Toronto, and like literally the way we did it was we searched hashtag Toronto and hashtag dogs on Instagram and just cold DM people, not even with a brand account, just with my own account. It's like some random brown town with this message trying to sell you dog food. Then once we got that validated, we're like, okay, like how do we kind of create and tell the story based on what people were actually resonating with? And that's when we're like, okay, we need someone who's like strong in this area. And that's really like the first like contractor hire. The first full-time hire we had was our scientist. Like Andrea, she's an absolute like legend, like has like built all of our formulations, this truly like product expertise. And I think like that's what we knew. Like once we got some traction beyond us like randomly DMing people, was like, okay, this is an area of importance because people treat their dogs like it's their babies and they want a lot of trust. Like as a brand, your first two jobs is like, how do people get to know you? And then two, how do people trust you? So for us, it was a lot around this trust. So we knew that like, how do people get to know you is not actually based on things like science. Like people don't care that like, if you eat freshly cooked dog food, your dog lives like 32 months longer or like fights urinary cancer. Like they care that like the poop is smaller so they could pick up less poop on the ground, like, so for us, like getting to know you as that video contractor and that trust piece was like really the scientist. And we wanted someone who could understand and move as fast as a startup should move. And that's tricky because like coming from those like more like structured professional industries, like graduate studies, like, PhD, etc. Like, you don't work in companies that move this fast, and especially in Canada. But luckily we found her because I saw her article that she published with University of Saskatchewan, one of the only few universities that do veterinary science studies. And it was around like how freshly cooked food in dogs and pets can improve digestibility. And I was like, let me just cold message her. I also like cold message a bunch of other people, but like these other students were not on. And here's this person in Saskatoon who's like willing to hear me out, and she ended up like staying with us as the longest employee in the company. Yeah. Yeah. So like product was like definitely key for us because like I'm not a veterinarian, so or like a canine nutrition scientist. So I realized like veterinarians, not to like offend a veterinarian, but like veterinarians don't really get a lot of studies into nutrition. And what we needed was a canine nutrition expert, and like that's what she was. She did her graduate studies in companion animal nutrition.
Awesome. I was wondering if you could talk to us a bit about your Dragon's Den appearance and what that meant for your brand and your business. I remember a few years back, like I think it might have been the replay when you guys came back on to say like how your status. I remember seeing a picture of like the Kabo and I was like, oh, this is a really good idea. And then I came across an alumni when I was finding. I'm like, oh my god, I think that's the same guy. Mm-hmm. So could you tell us about like what that appearance meant for you guys and the show, and I think Michelle Romano as well.
Yeah. Like I always advocate this to anyone who's building a company, whether it's direct to consumer or even tech. Like 100% take a platform like Dragon's Den, Shark's Tank, wherever you are, like use that as an opportunity. Like you have two benefits from that. One, you reach an audience, and two, you could find like some people who are willing to back you and support you with a great voice. And that's what it was for us. Like we've been watching that show since like, I don't know, like 2006, 2007 was when it first came out. Like been hooked on it forever. Never even thought we'd go on something like that. And, in December, I'd like to say December 2020 or so, like we were just expanding Kabo outside of just Toronto, Ontario area. We're going to Vancouver. There I was in like my brother's apartment, like literally like at this point of Kabo, like we're making things out of a slow cooker, like, and you're using like a Costco food saver vacuum sealer. Like there's nothing complex about this process, but we're like, let's try and get some Vancouver customers, build a recurring base, find a manufacturer, do the same thing again. And, I saw this notice where it's like, Dragon's Den's doing auditions, applied for the audition in January 2020. We get called in to do it. Had a great time doing it. Like the producers, everything was like phenomenal. Like obviously from watching the show, it's a big thing, but like we also did a ton of research to understand like what they're looking for. Because of our background in e-commerce, I think we felt a lot more confident with the numbers and things like that. And we just went right for it, and I just, brought as many products as I could, went right to the production audition in Vancouver. They're hosting at the Westin out there in Bayshore, and like had such a great time. Honestly, it was just like super conversational. Like I realized like the importance of Dragon's Den is a lot of like the opening line of like that first 30 seconds were like, hi, my name is Vino. I'm from Toronto, and I'm, helping dogs eat healthier and happier again. Like that opening piece, and I'm asking for blah, 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 and percentage of my company was kind of like the core thing that they looked at. And also like coming from doing some video production work in my background, I talked to you about before. like I also knew that, there's got to be a selling point here, right? Like there's got to be an angle, and I knew what angles I had coming into it. So we did this audition, hear back, it's going well, and then we're supposed to shoot in April 2020, and that's when COVID hits. So like at least to the mass, and all of a sudden like everything gets canceled, and like it's not going to happen. And we were so excited because we were super early stage. We took some money from family and friends, but really not a lot. Valuation was super low. We go into July, August, and they hit us up because film got the green light to do shooting again with certain restrictions. They're like, hey, we're going to shoot this. Like, we're just going to go for it. It's like a week's notice or something. So like, let's do it. My brother and I prep like crazy. We like watch a bunch of like videos, like start to see like the archetypes that they're looking for, and realize like there were two stories that we could tell from our end, which was, one, we could be like the annoying tech bros that come in with like some level of cockiness here, or two, like really tell our origin story. It was like, hey, we're some refugee immigrants who decided to like leave the States, come build this company in Canada because like we want to create blue collar jobs, the jobs like my parents work and still work to this day, and give back and like show that you could build a big company here and make a huge impact. Like that was a bit of the chip of the shoulder as to why we came back here to do this. It was luckily the latter, not the former, where we really were able to drive that story through. And I think the producers honestly do such a great job of like prepping everyone. Like we got so much prep from it, and we got to learn, and then we got on there. And luckily, like weirdly enough, a lot of the dragons have actually interacted with us in some way or form. Like Lane, who started a Penguin Club, we used to play that as kids back in the day. Like Jim, who did Boston Pizza, like my dad worked there, like as one of his first jobs. Like it was phenomenal. So like even before we start shooting, I'm like, hey, like Jim, like shout out, like you helped our family, and Lane, shout out, like you helped me waste a lot of time. I used to take like these toonies to like internet cafe and like pay to go play Penguin Club, like. So it was like super cool, like just creating a connection. Like when we got on there, like the shot, like the actual shoot day is like about an hour long. It actually depends on how well you do, but like it's about an hour long for us, and like it cuts down. And like if you're in one of the main snippets, it's like 8-9 minutes. If you're in the smaller snippets, it's like closer to like 4 or 5 minutes. But we just knew like, okay, when I go on there, I don't really want to talk about my numbers because like nobody wants to go on these shows and talk about their numbers. So we did have a little bit of like a how do I call it? A con artist like swindle, let's say. We realized like from watching the episodes that like when you use business jargon, it doesn't end up getting on there as much because they have to put this like little banner thing that says like AOV means average order value. So exactly, yeah. So then for us, what we realized, like anytime they ask about business stuff, I'm just gonna like jargon splurge because like as you can tell from now, like I just don't close my mouth. So I'm like, okay, if I just go rapid speech and just fire away, but just like throw a lot of jargon, makes the editor impossible to cut these pieces together. And truly, like every time they asked about like with business numbers, valuation, that kind of stuff, like we knew that wasn't the point of us being on there. It was to tell our story, and that's what we wanted our viewers to see. We wanted the dragons to get confidence in the business, but we wanted the viewers to see the story behind it because we knew at the end of the day, like this is going to be a valuable story for us to leverage and use. Like we see it with like Hush and all of our other friends, like these guys all use the best performing ad creative is still our Dragons Den video, right? Like, and so you want that to be great. You don't want it to be all about like valuations and numbers and like running around that story. So a lot of our episode, if you look back at it, it's like they'll have those like banners come up because they have to put like some business metrics. But for the most part, it's a lot of like our immigrant story, a lot of our story around our own pets and like why we wanted to solve this problem. It was just a fun experience overall. And like, that's why we love doing the recap episode. I love to like help entrepreneurs get back, like to apply and get on the show as well. And like, I'm 100% backing of any of the times the producers reach out or need any help. Like, absolutely love them. Like, I think it's a great platform for Canadian entrepreneurs and even Shark Tank for America.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
That really goes to show like the power of storytelling when trying to sell your brand to anyone and how important that story is. That's really cool. I know like Dragon's Den's a little bit different VC than your typical. Yeah. So I'm curious. You said you've learned a ton about the VC landscape, like after Facebook and all there. What did you learn about pitching to VCs? Like we had the other day, he gave a whole lesson to Next about how to approach VCs. He talked about how he flat out left waiting rooms to like make that power imbalance back even and let the VC know, hey, I'm in charge here, not you. What have you learned about, approaching VCs and your interactions with them?
Yeah, I think it's like very much like any type of human interaction where you're like reaching for something, like if you're in the dating experience, you're reaching to like show someone your value, like no matter what, like that experience and dynamic exists in everyone's life. The one thing I realized is like every single experience is drastically different. Like I did so much research into the fundraising experience. Like we raised about 4 million in our total lifespan, and our last raise was like 2021 or so. So we didn't need funding after that point. But a lot of the approaches was like an angel, like I think like Satish and Arti, who were both from Shopify, like backers of ours, Fod, Rob Lay, the whole Shopify exec group back in the early days, all the way down to like Hustle Fund, Angel Squad, Earth Rated, like one of our biggest investors. Like they all follow a different dynamic. Like some of them are like really, really diligent, like finance oriented, like business, consumer space. Like the Earth Rated co-founders, like some of the smartest people I know in the pet industry. They have the largest poop bag company for dogs, and they don't care a lot about this vision. Something like they're just very much on like the execution ability of the team, like the direction you have, the product, like all these kind of things. And that'll be drastically different than talking to like Fod, like one of the like, leaders in our entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Canada, like who comes from like developing apps and really had more of a belief on the team more than anything. One of our first checks, right? And a lot of my approach to like venture capital or any type of fundraising is like, do your research. Like I would look through and see if that person didn't have a dog. I'd find people tagged in their Instagram accounts, find their brother or sister, some kind of family member, what kind of dog breed it was, like going down and changing every single deck I presented. Like every single deck I presented to every single person was drastically different.
It was tailored to them.
Exactly. Somehow in some way tailors them. Because sometimes you get these like these like lessons where it's like, talk about the problem first, talk about the team. Like that's not true. You have to figure out how that person makes that investment decision and adjust accordingly. Like there are people who cared way more about the team first. And that's the number one thing I want to get off their mind, because they're going to sit in that meeting with you and all they think about as the slides go by is like, or as you talk, is just how do I like, my conviction point is team. I haven't heard about team yet. I'm not paying attention to anything until this team piece comes in. Right. And that's not a great, position to be in, because your goal is right away, like get that initial point of confidence, which is if they care about team, you talk about that first. If they care about product, you talk about first. If they care about performance, you talk about that first. And, a lot of the times, performance is a huge thing. And now in this market it matters a lot. So like literally the first slide was like, here's us at like freaking 3 million annual recurring revenue within like a span of a few years. And like, here's the retention rate over 90%. Like no one else has this kind of numbers than us. Then after I can go talk about whatever the hell I want to talk about, my vision, all this kind of stuff. But like they're way more open-minded. Like, right away, you've taken the number one worry and filter they've taken out of their head. That's why I think that personalization of VC pitch is important. I think sometimes like those tactics of like, like making them wait or whatever it is, like once again, it goes to the personalization piece, right? Like I have worked with a lot of Canadian venture capital firms, which I won't name, but this is a great example where they're like, they'll bring you to multiple meetings, and this guy like sends me an email being like, I went downstairs, I talked to 15 people who had dogs and asked them if they'd buy freshly cooked dog food. First of all, it's a new product for them. You can't even find it in grocery stores. It's not mainstream. So how do people know what they want when they haven't even presented that option? And you're obviously not selling it the best. And he's like, they don't want it. Like, we'll back out. A year later, this guy comes back. 2 years later, this guy comes back asking for the deal. Never gave him the opportunity to get into it, because I think there's two things. It wasn't just like my spite. I think it was just the other thing being like, more importantly, was the fact that, that venture firm wasn't as well aligned in terms of my vision. If they couldn't get it from like those main points that I'm like driving home with people, which was like team, performance, and vision, then like, why will I let this guy hitch onto my wagon after we've proven and had validation? Like, he came after us after like his LPs. So the LPs in some of the biggest firms here, like Panache, Golden, etc. After all those firms would turn us down, would be like, hey, I invested in this, and those guys invest in those firms. So it's kind of like your boss's boss be like, hey, I invested in them. Why haven't you invested? Your job is to be my investment firm. And that's when they come to us. And I think like, that's what I realized, like the people that we won on earlier, honestly, the best investors I have to this day, like I'll vouch anything. Like I've been lucky enough, like my first like fundraising experience was with these investors. Like I'll go to the grave with these guys. Like they're phenomenal, like absolutely phenomenal. But it was because I tailored it to each of their approach. It wasn't like the story was being misconstrued. It was like presenting what's the most important to them first, and then really talking, going through these things that were the most valuable. But in general, if I were to say a tactic, I'd probably say like, don't share too much. Like sometimes people just like dump and share their entire deck and things like that. Like have a teaser deck where it's like 3-4 slides, and then save your full information over. Like you're almost like giving a little bit of information each time. You're kind of like teasing them slowly and slowly and slowly. And it's not because it builds demand, but it helps you validate how interested they are in you. Because a lot of these firms, especially Canadian firms, are just going to be like, hey, let's get access to your data room. And to be honest, like a lot of firms in general are just like data mining at this point. Like they're just getting your information so they could like catalog you in pets because it's such a big category, and like benchmark you against anyone else who comes to the table. And I realized that the hard way after sharing a lot of data rooms and sharing a lot of data. I'm like, okay, like I realized like, you know what? They're never really interested. They never showed the signals. Like what they wanted was like the data and insights so they can kind of benchmark as to how the competition's happening here versus an overseas market. Hopefully do some travel soon,
Where would you go if you could travel anywhere? Where'd you go?
Well, I've traveled to like 40 countries so far, so it's like I'm not gonna hit the peak as I did earlier on. A lot of it was like Facebook funded, so it's like a little different. But I'm planning to do a little bit more of South America. I'm going to Africa, like a few more countries in Africa. Well, I've only been to Botswana. So, but I want to do like Tanzania. I want to do like Northern Africa. I want to do I want to do as much of Africa and like Asia as possible, because the older you get, like the less likely you're going to go to somewhere that you can't tolerate the heat or something, the food, you become old and grumpy. To do the things that like my goal number one was like go to every communist country and like every country under like a lot of like havoc, because when you're in your 20s you can handle it. Like, yeah, you get like more anxiety fills your life. That's the way it works as you get older, I think.
What perspective is that giving you traveling? I want to stay on that for a second. How's that changed your perspective in just life, but maybe also business as well?
In business, and like in business for sure, like I have such an appetite to build something on the global spectrum. Like especially now after Kabo and PackFresh exit, like a lot of my time I'm thinking about like, I spent some time in Chile, like absolutely love the South American market. Like I remember on Facebook in the early days when we'd see people buying like makeup brushes on Facebook ads in like Middle East or in like places like Malaysia. And it like depicted so much of like this middle income household growth that we had in like in North America in the 40s, 30s, 40s. This was like booming up. And you get to see that now, but in like other countries. And it's phenomenal. Like obviously we see now where the Middle East has left, like grown to with like Dubai and Saudi Arabia's investments towards these things that we have in Western communities. But like South America is like literally around the corner, like huge population growth, middle income households are growing. Like they want to spend their money on something of value, and people aren't servicing them. And you see these patterns across the world. And I think like that's what I love the most. And like when you travel, you get to see it firsthand. Like you get to see, okay, like they don't really have this, but you see something like Rappi, which is like the competitor to like Uber Eats or DoorDash or whatever in Colombia and like these South American countries, and you see how well it works or how much better it actually works. Like the economics are way better there, and the adoption is way better, and like it benefits businesses better. And it's like when you see that impact and that growth, like I truly have this appetite for it. Like spending 8 months in China, I was like huge appetite for like building businesses globally more than anything else. And I think in the beginning, because I was building my stride as like an early entrepreneur, like, wanted to stay home, wanted to build it from local going forward. But now with the confidence that I have, I'm like, okay, I can kind of jump out and do whatever I need to do. And I think like on a personal level, I think just like every human should travel. It's like a base requirement. Like you can't just like think everyone's going to be like thinking exactly like you. Like there's this huge dynamic of like being around people, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, that requires you to think differently and have perspective and empathy and thinking about something from another point of view. And like we see that a lot now, obviously, with like polarized politics or polarized opinions. Like at the end of the day, you should be able to see the other person's side. And a lot of that comes from travel. And when you could see someone with different circumstances, like I'm a refugee who almost got deported twice by liberal government. And it was a conservative that meant that let me stay here. Like how well the kind of logic does that make, like, so, I think a lot of travel, a lot of these things like helps open your eyes to these things that we tend to have as like siloed opinions because of like how the internet shows something or how your community shows something. So on a personal level, I think it's like an absolute must. Like I think everyone should take some time off before they go and work post university or college. It's just like, let's go and travel and see something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. We don't have too much time left here, Vino, so we want to get to your second venture quickly. But just before then, real quick, tell us a little bit about what it was like to sell Kabo and the decision behind that and how that felt.
Yeah. So a lot of it, I don't think any entrepreneur is like, I'm gonna go into this and I'm going to go through a lot of tough times, eventually have some wins, and then sell it. Everyone thinks like I'm gonna go in, it's gonna go like this, and then sell it. The truth is there's a lot of this in between up and down, and I think like one of the experiences that helped us like start to think more about this acquisition and merger opportunity was really around like the post-COVID financing drought that we kind of see to this day, even where, one, being direct to consumer was the worst category, even to this day, for financing and fundraising, where we knew we had this like model proven out. All we needed to do was bring production in house, and then boom, like our EBITDA is 9%, like we're phenomenal. We were positive EBITDA at the time, cash flow is going in the right direction. And we built out our second venture at the time, Pack Fresh, just to actually generate more revenue and income from these fulfillment centers that we built out. And I think what really made sense for us was like, we could spend another 5 years slowly getting production in house, slowly getting the money from like a BDC or a bank, and like slowly being able to cook it ourselves instead of going to a co-manufacturer who has all of our recipes. And maybe then get into retail, and that's another 5 years. And like, do you really want to drag this out, or like, what's the end goal here? Like, there is this like selfish mentality where it's like, yes, I can do it myself and maintain more equity and things like that. But then there's like the more realistic point of view, which is like, our investors invested early on in us. Like, we want to stay aggressive. We were the number one fresh dog food company in Canada. We had this like market dominance. We also knew like going to the States and like going into retail were things that would require us to have in-house production, a lot more capital. So we could either do this a slow way and someone else would come in, and by then maybe Purina catches on to freshly cooked dog food and like gets onto these new product forms and like data capturing like we did. Or we think a little smarter and say like, is there an opportunity for us to get acquired or merge with the company and grow faster, and everyone could win in a larger scale? And truly, that's what it was. It was like this initial survival instinct of like, okay, we're not closing this next round that we need to like get over the hump. And the unglamorous reality was like, okay, the best option is like get acquired. And we did talk to companies like, the Hello Freshes, the Good Foods of the world, like that would be classic D2C. But what mattered for us was like, who actually produces food in house? Like, these guys are, they collect the food and they put it in a box and send it to you. What benefit do I have joining HelloFresh? Right? It doesn't help my business. Sure, we can have an exit, but what does it mean? And that's how we came across Ethy Group, which is like this food manufacturer who does like ready to eat human food. And they have a production facility in London, Ontario. Their performance was double our performance. When we looked at their performance numbers, it was phenomenal. Like the revenue they're driving, the overall like state at which they were performing their business was phenomenal. And they're like zero waste. They didn't everything kind of clicked in, because like here we are as a physical goods company. You have waste that you're creating from your packaging, all this kind of stuff. And here's a company that's like taking that and making money out of it. So it's like all I could think in my mind was like, here's our EBITDA going up and up and up. I'm like, okay, like let's spend some more time there. And what people don't know about this whole merger and acquisition M&A process is like it's a lot of relationship building. I met that guy in 2019 before I even like right when I started in the business. But it wasn't until 2021 that they reached out to us. We weren't as interested in that time. Later half of 2021, we started getting back in touch, and the process took like up until February 8th, 2023 to fully close. So it was like almost like a little over a year, but it's a lot of diligence. It's a lot of back and forth. It's a lot of like understanding like what you want out of it versus what, well, what they want. They want your company at the end of the day. But like you have to like really advocate for what you want. And for me, it was like a lot of my ownership was around like the investor return. Like we could have taken a deal with like a lot less valuation, and that was like 100% pure cash up front, but it wouldn't have given the best return for our investors. Like I wanted to make sure there's a great return for them. This is not just about like us getting the most personally for ourselves, but like for us to have a big win in general. And secondly, like almost equally as important, which was like, can someone continue to grow the brand? Like these guys had in-house production. They had all the efficiency. They had zero waste. Like all these things is what would take us 5 to 10 years to build. And they had it all in the house. And that was like a huge decision around why we made the decision to jump with them. And, even the deal we did, like what people would end up talking about is like the type of deals with acquisitions. Like sometimes you just think of like huge cash paycheck and you're done. With us, like at that market and at that time, like even in that, like you're not getting huge cash payouts. So like we could, like if we were to take like a full cash liquidity payout, the number would be, I don't even know, like 5-6 times like. So instead, we ended up doing a share purchase agreement where they end up actually acquiring and you exchange your shares for their shares, which is of a certain valuation. And then you get your opportunity for liquidity like out down the road. So for us, with the CEO and founder, like really lining up a great liquidity opportunity for us, had like all these things that he was sharing through from like contracts to like upcoming fundraising and like secondary opportunities to buy out our shares. Like all that stuff was very clear. And we knew that the bet made the most sense because one, the business gets to continue. We get the opportunity to drive a stronger EBITDA, better quality product, having in-house production, getting into retail, doing the direction of the business to go. And then two, here's this great opportunity with the business doing 2x of what we're doing, has great amount of financing as well coming in. And then on top of that, like great facility, economics, all lines up. And then third, like the liquidity kind of comes into play, not immediately, but like shortly afterwards. And that was like what really drove the decision for us to say, okay, like this really connects and aligns with us. It's very rarely you get two of those buckets checked off where like you get a great return and your business continues. Like sometimes it's a lot of like teams get acquired. Sometimes it's a lot of like, you get maybe a great like a cash exit, but like sometimes the brands don't live longer onward. But we were like really diligent. If it wasn't for like a lot of the due diligence materials that they shared, like the financials, etc., like we wouldn't have made that decision with the company that we did.
That's awesome. And how did you I guess meet them? Like was it an introduction? How did you get to that point where you're like, okay, these guys are even on the table to be a possible acquirer?
Yeah. So the interesting part is like even our competitors in the States that do fresh dog food, like we've known all of our competitors, like we've been in touch with the HelloFreshes, Good Foods of the world. Cause like in the beginning I did have this mentality of like this glamorized idea of like, we'll just build it and sell it in 3 years, which is not what it took. It took 5 years. But we met them because in 2019, when we were first like making the food in our own house, we wanted to figure out like what's the steps to actually having your own manufacturing facility. And we heard about, the Ready to Eat meal brand. We reached out to the founder, cold email, and just said, hey, can we come visit your facility? He's like, cool, we can come by. We came by, saw it, learned it. And that's like our initial touch point of interaction. We didn't talk for like 3 years after, I guess. But having that initial touch point was what kind of opened the door for us to say like, he did come after us originally, but out of all the conversations we had, most of the times it's because we had a pre-existing relationship that we can go back to. So like, going back to the people that we talked to in the States, going back to the people we talked to in the UK that were like heavily funded, and then going back and talking to the Canadian food companies that we knew here as well, like we initially touched point with them. So I think a lot of the times when I talk to people who are like, oh, like how'd you get acquired? Like, do you think it just happens at the end? Because you're like, okay, I hit this performance, okay, now I go and talk to people. It's like a full year process just to like get the work done. Imagine if you don't have that relationship. So a lot of the times I give advice is just like, get in touch with the people that are in your industry, right? Like if you're in clothing, like talk to another, like have that relationship, even if it's just like a touch point with just about anyone. But having that relationship with the CEO and founder of that company in 2019, when we were trying to figure out how to manufacture, was the reason, we were able to go back to them and have a level of comfort. He has a level of comfort of our story because he knew where we started from, which was zero. Right. And like, that's the best. It actually even works the same with fundraising. It's like the best is like, go talk to VCs before you even have a product. If they say no, great. Like go back to them in 3 months. Like the best feeling I ever had was like going back in 3 months in fundraising and being like, hey, like we're at like 200K MRR now. Like before you saw us, we're like under 100K MRR. Like, that feeling of going back to someone with performance and results is what matters. And like one of my biggest mentors and informal advisors was the president of Good Food. And like, Neil's been absolutely phenomenal in my career and like even trajectory. And even though we didn't end up working on a deal together, like I like valued every single point of that relationship. And similarly to the company that acquired us, like talked to that guy in 2019 when I just started the company and just said, hey, I don't know anything, but like, how are you shipping your products? Like, and he literally like found the shipping company they work with. He introduced me to them so that we got the same rates that Good Food got. Like, is because like he introduced us to them and like you build that relationship, like he wants to keep an eye on me just as much as like I want to get value from him. So a lot of the that M&A event happened because of a relationship I started like super early. And a lot of the ones that we ended up like talking to in contention with that one was because we had that relationship super early.
That's so cool, because I imagine there's a ton of people out there who would view them as competitors, not as someone you could seek advice from, or planting a seed with an investor, like, you know, that could potentially hinder your opportunity for them to invest down the line if you don't have a product yet. So that's super. That's a lesson learned for me at least.
Yes, sometimes you gotta roll the dice and go for it, and like you gotta. I think that's where that part of like believing yourself, where you're like, okay, I'm gonna talk to them about this time. But when he or she says no, I'm gonna come back to them a month from now, or 2 months from now, 3 months from now, and show them like they were wrong. You know, no better feeling than proving something. So, whether it's your parents or an investor or someone's gonna acquire you.
Exactly.
That's so true. Tell us about your second venture and how that kind of connected into the back end of Kabo, and what it was like you sold that recently, and now you're a free man. Tell us about all that.
So hopefully it's the same acquirer for everything. So life made it super simple, but we started Pack Fresh, which is a fresh and frozen third-party logistics company. Like it helps with the storage, pick and pack of any fresh or frozen direct-to-consumer or retail brand in Canada, and helps deliver it to the retailer or the consumer. And, you know, kind of putting the pieces together, the reason we had that is because we built our own fulfillment system for Kabo. So because our product was fresh and frozen, we realized in Canada, it's actually very difficult to get like frozen storage, and having people like pick and pack a box for this dog and put a name for this dog and this, and like, it just costs too much. So we actually went through the process of building out fulfillment centers, these giant like 10,000 square foot freezers across Canada, from like BC, Alberta, Mississauga, and now we have one in Montreal. And we realized, like, even though we're running this for Kabo, we're only using like maybe 30 to 50%, 60% of the space at all times. When 2021 hit and there's no financing, we're like, shoot, like, how do we make some money to like keep things afloat or invest in the things that we're investing in? We had this extra space. Our head of operations, Karin, who still works at the company today and runs Pack Fresh, came up with this idea. It's like, hey, listen, like, why don't we just like offer what we do for ourselves to other DC brand? Because they're all out there raising money to build fulfillment centers too. It's like, why are we all making money to do the same thing? It's like, so it's almost like this alliance or this co-op system where we went to like other frozen food brands that were doing pizza, you know, Italian food, whatever, like, you know, any type of culinary experience you can imagine that was, whether being fulfilled in Costco, whether it's direct to consumer. And we said, hey, listen, like, we built it for like dog customers, and it's like frozen. We can figure it out. We have last mile shipping, super cheap, and works for our economics. We want to offer the same thing to you. And the benefit we get is because we run these fulfillment centers, like, part of the space is already being used. So I'm not dependent on these clients to run these centers. So I can give them a price that like no one else can provide, like a Versa Cold, which is like a larger cold chain distribution center. You know, they only take big clients for like pulling in like 2,000 pallets of like fish, for instance, like super simple. You pull it out, you ship it out to Loblaws. This is different. You got to pull out a product. You got to put cookies in this one, put like snacks in this, whatever it is. We built that system. Now we have over like 20 different clients across Canada that we service, and they're using the system to help Kabo grow. And what we found that like sold well to customers was like the fact that we actually ran a D2C brand. Like, how many of these warehouse companies have actually run a brand and gone through the rigmarole that we've gone through, right? Like, not a lot. So we were able to like really empathize with the consumer, i.e. our clients. I brought them on board, built that business out. And luckily, the parent food company at the group that acquired Kabo was like really interested as well in that, because they saw it as, hey, this is the back end operations for picking and packing and storing a product and delivering it. These guys built that too. We manufacture goods. Imagine if now someone has an idea to build a food product, they can come to us, we can make it, send it to Pack Fresh to deliver and fulfill that product. On top of the fact, we get a dog food brand. So luckily, we were able to package all of it together, get over like a 6x return for an entire, based on our revenues, like across the board. And a lot of that came because we had those two offerings. And, you know, typically you hear in the startup world, the opposite advice, you know, keep focused. Like, we should say focus on dog food, stay focused on dog food. But, you know, when money's tight, you know, you want to figure out how to manage your cash flow.
It's very similar to like AWS. I think about that and the fact, you know, like with AWS, Amazon made these huge compute centers, and I guess they weren't at 100% utilization. They said, hey, let's make cloud compute so other companies can use it too. It's a very similar playbook.
Exactly.
So that's really cool.
Exactly.
Wow.
Their advice on both spectrums of things, but at the end of the day, for us, I was just like, man, I got to pay these bills. So like, I'm just going to do this. And it just worked out. So was lucky enough. And then now that we've exited that, like a lot of my time has been spent with like working with a lot of new companies and mainly because like talking to a lot of founders who've gone through exits, I kind of prepared myself as to the loss of purpose that I would feel.
Yeah, we've heard that from people. Is it true?
It is 100% true. It is a mental, and like, number one, make sure you have a really good therapist. And two, like, make sure you're like really into meditation. And I think like I attribute a lot of my success to like this coach I work with, Faz Ahmed. Like I give you a huge shout out to him. He's actually a basketball coach. So he worked on the Canada basketball team that won bronze this past year. He's worked with like Lou's one of the like top performing NBA players, and like Ludo, yeah, phenomenal. Yeah, so he was just out there doing some training with him just this past week, and like he went to high school with me, but like a lot of the performance-based mentality and like thinking is kind of the stage I'm in right now. Like I need to. It's not like I'm 20 and I have an idea I can just run with the wind, and I can just like go for it and like have a bit of oblivious naivety, which is like beautiful in terms of building a company. Now I'm like overthinking things, and like Fez has this like mentality around like how you think about like meditation and like all these kind of practices, and I think a lot of that helps me figure out like here are the areas I'm really good at and strong in. In the world of e-commerce, physical goods, like even on the tech side of that, like I'm very confident in that. I have a strong interest on the global side, but right now a lot of my time is like, okay, where do I get the most energy from? It's like from founders, and that's why I love reaching out to founders and be like, hey, listen, like let me help you grow your business. And most of the time I'm just doing this stuff for free. Like for people, it's because I have this natural intrigue and drive, and I want to find that again. And I think like sometimes when you're building a company, you're so fixated. I was like, yo, I can't go to this like collision conference stuff or this networking thing. Like, screw this. I gotta go sell some dog food, man. Like I gotta sling some dog food on the internet. Like I don't have time for this stuff. Like how's it let me sell dog food? Like, but I think like now that I've gotten this space away from it, like what Fez is always kind of harping on me is like this mentality of like training yourself and like kind of bringing yourself to this like performance level. And like I think a lot of that work I was doing prior to like while I was doing this acquisition piece, and then now as I continue, I'm like I just want to spend some time with founders and like help support people as much as possible, and hopefully that figures out my next journey.
Yeah. That's a nice segue into our final question, I think, here. We always ask our guests kind of like what advice they would give to, people who want to follow in your path and build something, especially like early on in their career. So what advice can you offer to someone who's maybe like us, we've just finished school, we're thinking about entrepreneurship, we want to be entrepreneurs, but maybe we're not sure where to start, or maybe we have started. What advice do you have for us early on?
Don't do it. No. I think the biggest advice I would have like on the entrepreneurship side is just, take advantage of the confidence you have. Like run an idea through. Like a lot of the times, like I would run so many ideas through and I'd create a website, talk to people about it, and it just flops. Maybe my interest, maybe I just think the challenge is too much. Who cares? The practice of getting through that is like the number one thing that like helped me build confidence. On the other side, I think what really matters is like you need to like build yourself as if you're as if you're training math. Like the way Lou trains is like the same way like every single entrepreneurship training. Like you're not as like physically exerting yourself, but you're mentally exerting yourself to a level you will never understand. Like the amount of stuff you go through in terms of depression and in terms of highs and lows is phenomenal. It's quite the journey, and like I wouldn't take it back for anything. But I think what people can do is just become more self-aware in themselves, like really understanding the practices that like allow you to control your mind and your thinking, like things like meditation, travel, like having a partner who supports you, learning how to communicate with people around you. Like, one of the things that I always do with Fez is like, every morning I'm like texting him and be like, what do I want to get out of my body today? It's like mentally, like ask yourself, like, what am I trying to get out of myself today? Right? Like, am I trying to close a sale? Like that counts as like getting something out of your body. But at the same time, it's like, do I want to still have energy at 3 p.m.? Do I still want to have the same drive? Do I want to overcome the things that I'm procrastinating all the time? Do I want to go to the gym? All this kind of stuff. Then it's like asking yourself, like, do you have a team that's ready to support you? And I think like that thing is like one of the biggest pieces you could start working on early on. Create a list of people that support you and people who just like talk shit about you. Or like talk shit about the idea or like kind of undercut you, especially in those early years. Like I had so many friends where I'm like talking about something, they're like, yeah, like I could have done this, or like I could have done that too, or like, yeah, like that was on my table. Like you don't need that in your life. Like consciously think about the people that are around you and supporting you. And I always have like 3 people on the top of my mind that are like always there and backing me. And then it's like the next question is like, are you ready to fail constantly? and like accepting that consciously, like doing these activities consciously just trains your mind as if you're like going to the gym and like pushing weight, And the last piece just being like, do you deserve success? Like compounding on all those components are like super key in terms of mentally preparing yourself for the long term. Because if you're starting a company, you're not going in it for this initial level of success. You're going in it for like a 10-year war. It's not a battle you're fighting. It's a 10-year war. So be, level set as much as possible on that. And like all you need to do is the best version of yourself. And yes, you might feel more in your prime at a certain point, and you might have like endless energy, but at a certain point that will depreciate, or like everyone's human, like everyone's different. And I think having that towards yourself is what like allowed us to create great environments for our team to prosper and like do what they do best. And, bringing the best people that support us, like investors, everything like that. Like I can think about those like 4 key questions, and like my investors would fall into that as people support me. The actions I take every day allow me to fail. And, the people behind me also allow me to feel like I deserve success. So like, that mental like aptitude towards like fighting the long fight is like one of the biggest things I always tell people to like go for.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Vino.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, guys.
Yeah,
This is great.
Thank you for trekking down to the next office. Yeah, for taking the time.
I think that might have been our best episode.
Yeah.
I'm not just saying that. Like obviously I can say that because you're here, but like no, that was really good.